All right, Jenny and Scott, you guys ready? All right, so we'll kick things off here. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our first public meeting of the Brodhead Road Corridor Planning Study. My name is Joshua Spano. I am a transportation planner here at the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission. And with me this evening, who also will be speaking for our presentation, which is about 13 slides. And then we'll get into some question and answers and some breakout groups. But first, you'll hear from Jenny Easton from Paschik MTR, one of our consultants, and then also Scott Thompson Graves, our project manager, and also he's with WRA as well. And you'll hear from him a little bit later. So again, my name is Joshua Spano. I am the project manager for the project. Next slide, please, Jenny. So we have a pretty full agenda tonight. Our goal tonight is to really hear from you all. We've done some pretty extensive work gathering a lot of information and data, and really now it's time to hear what you all, your thoughts on the corridor and some of your experiences and your feedback along the corridor. So, but before we get into that, we definitely want to go around and explain what the project is all about. And you'll see here the agenda. We're going to run through the project background, the schedule, and how we're approaching this, and some of the expected outcomes, and also what's next. Following a short presentation of the plan here, we'll have a quick 15-minute question and answer session. So if you have any questions in the meantime, please feel free to put it in the chat box, and we'll have a 15-minute question and answer session before we break out into different groups to talk a little bit more in depth about certain issues. And then as you see there, we'll break out into certain groups as well. But also in the meantime, we want to hear from you on some specific questions. In particular, we have four different poll questions. And I think right now it's time for poll question number one. So if you wouldn't mind, Jenny, I'll turn it over to you for poll question number one.
Sure, we thought we'd mix it up, and in addition to briefing you on the project tonight, we're hoping to learn from you in different ways, one of which would be these interactive poll pop-ups. I'll be sneaking in here and there. So our first question, see if we can get it up here for you. How do you use Brodhead Road? You can click multiple options. Please click all of those that apply. And if you use Brodhead Road in a way that we have not included here, let us know in the chat box.
Yeah, we'll give it here about 20 seconds or so. We appreciate the answers. And again, everything is going to be incorporated into the plan. Again, we're here tonight to listen and get your feedback on a wide variety of topics. And I'll touch upon some of those as we go along in the presentation as well. So thank you.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay. Still again, a couple responses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, we'll give it like the 15-second final call. All right, that looks great. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jenny. And also, this meeting is being recorded. I just want to mention that for everyone that's on the call as well. We are recording that as well. So a little bit about the project background. So we're tasked with identifying and looking and examining Brodhead Road from the Monaca Center Township line at Old Brodhead Road all the way down, which is an 11-mile stretch, to the Beaver County, Allegheny County border. The goals really of the study is to examine how we can improve and make recommendations on transportation's operations and safety for all modes of transportation along the corridor. We're going to be looking at transit. We're going to be looking at bicycle and pedestrian operations, as well as single occupancy vehicles. So this is our study area. We understand that it's very complex. Again, it's an 11-mile stretch of roadway. It's a mix of commercial districts, especially in the northern section near the mall. And as you traverse the corridor south, it becomes a little bit more residential as you get near the city of Aliquippa. And then it's kind of a mixed use development as you get further and closer to Allegheny County. So that is our study area and a little bit about the project background. Next slide, please. So,
Sure.
yep.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. You're good. Poll
I
question
wanted
number
to throw
2.
in another poll there.
Yep.
Along the stretch of Broadhead that Josh mentioned is within our study area, there's an abundance of great local landmarks and places to go. So if I can interrupt with another poll here, the second question would be, what's your favorite Brodhead Road destination? This would be maybe a spot that you frequent or one that really stands out as a place to go. We've listed some here, definitely not all. And again, if your choice is not on this list, please share it with us in the chat. I've heard good things about Harold's.
I was just gonna say that. Papa Duke's too. Maybe we'll have to check out that more out in the corridor too.
Walmart Lowe's is probably the most I've been to.
Yeah, and you can't do one or the other.
Great, we'll give that a few more seconds. Walmart's looking very unpopular at the moment. All right, thanks everybody. Let's move on to hear more about the study.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. So this vision statement really is a collaboration between our steering committee members and staff members at SPC. We really wanted to drive home what the study is all about. And so we presented this statement to our steering committee members, which are members of several SPC staff members, as well as several Beaver County officials as well, Joe West and Livability, as well as some PennDOT folks, Doug Seeley and Todd Kravis at PennDOT District 11, as well as some other local municipality representatives from Center Township and Hopewell Township. And we really thought this statement is going to drive home the need on the corridor and what we're really trying to accomplish here. So really the study should make recommendations. And when we talk about recommendations, we're talking about transportation recommendations that will improve regional mobility and accessibility for all. And I mentioned there before, we're looking at all modes of transportation is when we mean that accessibility for all. We also want to have these transportation recommendations enhance the quality of life and livability of the community, and it also advance economic and community development goals. So we want to definitely have these recommendations to enhance land use and enhance the surrounding communities and not deter any further development from the community as well. Next slide, please. So with that being said, we come to our study goals, and it sort of touches upon what I just talked about. But again, our goal here is to identify operational and safety, transportation operations and safety suggestions and recommendations for the corridor. And doing so, we want to develop a list of short-term, mid-term, and long-term recommendations for the corridor to improve these study goals. So everything that we're doing is really to enhance and to supplement these goals that you see here on the screen. So, and these aren't in any order. I'm just going to go through left to right. And so the first one is being mobility and improve regional mobility and accessibility for all. We want to connect those linkages that are missing along the corridor, whether it be bicycling or pedestrian. We want to enhance transit usage along the corridor. We want to find gaps in the network for whatever it may be. And, and then second there, we move to the next bullet here, and it's really operations. It's reducing congestion, finding those bottlenecks along the corridor, improving system reliability, and then, probably most importantly here is improve safety along the corridor as well. Moving to the next one is economic and community development. We want to make sure that any of these recommendations support what the locals and what the local municipalities envision for this corridor, and support their land uses, support their zoning, and support any further development aspirations within the community. Fourth here, we talk about land use planning. And again, it kind of goes along the same lines as economic and community development growth. Support the existing land uses and make the existing land uses that may be more desirable for development, make those more attractive to bring in jobs and bring in more folks to this region, because we do understand that this area may be prime for development. We have the Shell cracker plant that's obviously in place now and will be operational in the next couple of years. There's plenty of developable land along the river, and we recognize that. And we did some pretty extensive research and meeting with some of the business folks. I think it was last Friday, and really got their understanding of the corridor and what they envision down the line as well. Goods and freight distribution. We heard from a lot of folks in our key person interviews that this was definitely an issue with freight movements along the corridor for the local businesses. Obviously, going back to the map there, you see that I-376 and Route 51 run parallel to the corridor. And we do see a lot of freight movements along the corridor, and probably will expect that to increase in the near future with all the development activities as well. Facilities, we talk here about bicycle and pedestrian facilities. We want to identify the gaps in the system and enhance the use of sidewalks, potentially bike lanes, and various accommodations for bicyclists and pedestrians that want to utilize the facility or don't have a single occupancy vehicle, and that this is their only form of transportation along the corridor. And last but not least is livability. We want to improve the quality of life for the residents in Beaver County, especially in this area. And we want to make it a safe and reliable system. And so with that, we'll develop some strategies and recommendations here to, again, improve safety, which obviously improves the quality of life and the livability of the roadway and the surrounding communities. So with that being said, I think we have our poll question number 3. So I'll turn it back over to Jenny.
We do. You might have started to suspect I would ask. So based on how Josh described each of these goals for the corridor planning study, which of them do you view as being the most important? So these are different areas we want our short, medium, and long-term recommendations to address. Given what you know about Brodhead Road as it exists today, which of these categories will really need to play into what our study will recommend? Your top priority.
And while we're waiting for this one to close, I just wanted to quickly talk about, with key person interviews. We've met, Jenny and myself and Scott and some other folks on the consultant team. We've met with a large number of stakeholders along the corridor, including the educational institutions, the Beaver County commissioners, some of the business development folks, first responders this morning, the local municipalities, the transit agency. So we've gathered a lot of information already, and this is just another part of our outreach. And again, we're here to learn from you all and understand some of your concerns along the corridor as well. So with that, I think we're almost ready for that poll to close.
We are. Yeah, a lot of interest in operations. Thank you, everybody. So, keep things moving here.
Thanks, Jenny. So our project schedule. So we really kicked this off back in January, which actually seems like forever ago, even though it's only been a couple months. But with COVID, I think sometimes time flies here. But nevertheless, we kicked off with our consultant team, Pashik and WRA, back in January. And really, the first part of this is to gather a bunch of data. WRA and Pashik have been out in the corridor gathering and doing field observations. We've been supplying them with a bunch of data, travel time data, crash data, and so on and so forth. And really, that brings us to our stakeholder in our first public meeting here. And it's really understand, we can look at all the data we want, but it's really verifying the data from what we hear from you all folks that live and have a stake in this corridor. So that's why we're here today, and really to enhance validate what the data says as well. Come March, we'll develop our existing and future conditions reports. And that's basically taking what we already know in the corridor and then growing the traffic. You see that kind of over a March and April timeframe and then we start really developing our recommendations in the April-May timeframe. And like I said before, we're going to be looking at everything from short, mid, and long-term recommendations for the corridor. It may be something as simple as, hey, this stop sign on Center Grange Road is missing its retroreflectivity and needs replaced. Or it could be something as big as, hey, 5 Points intersection is a bottleneck nightmare for the community. We need to do something about it. and here are some options to help alleviate the congestion and improve safety on that corridor. We'll also come back with a second public meeting in the May-ish timeframe, which we will present some of the recommendations that we have developed for the corridor. And then finally, probably come midsummer, June, July timeframe, we'll hope to have a final plan in place in which we will present to our board and probably the Beaver County Commissioners as well. So with that being said, I am going to turn it over to our project manager, Scott Thompson Graves from WRA. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Josh. So who all is involved in the project? Well, the project includes the project team, which is SPC, WRA, and PASHIC MTR. We're being led by a steering committee for the project, which includes SPC, Beaver County Corporation for Economic Development, as well as PennDOT and the municipalities along the corridor. We've met with elected and appointed officials. We've met with nearly 80 identified stakeholders along the corridor, including school districts, the Beaver County Transit Authority. And then it's going to include public engagement at multiple stages, as Josh had just indicated.
Yeah, as long as we were talking about who's involved, your final fourth poll question, I'm hoping will help us get a sense of who's here tonight and what communities are represented. So please take a moment and let us know which of the communities you call home. Excellent, we'll give that a few seconds. Thanks, everybody, much appreciated. Oh, Scott, you're on mute.
Just got that. So what's involved in the study is, first, as Josh indicated, we're going to determine the needs. That'll be driven by the public outreach, the stakeholders, and the public meeting tonight. We'll have a data and evaluation phase where we look at historic crash rates, accessibility along the corridor, via modes of travel, operations and congestion. We've conducted counts throughout the study area. We've looked at historic traffic counts as well. So we measure the impacts of the pandemic on travel. We'll determine potential investment strategies and policies, and then we'll produce a plan with short, medium, and long-term recommendations. So then we'll use that information to predict the future. First, we'll have a good understanding of the nature of the corridor and how it's used today. For example, we'll understand recurring congestion. So, we all know at 5 Points intersection, it gets pretty congested every day there. We'll also look at non-recurring congestion. What are the impacts of holiday traffic and shopping traffic on traffic patterns in the area? We'll look at what happens when there are incidents on the parkway and traffic is diverted to Brodhead Road. And we'll look at what the impacts are of construction throughout the project area. We'll also look at pedestrian, bike, and transit activity and freight connections to understand how all of those modes of travel use the corridor. We'll then take insights we gain from public outreach to develop what factors may change in the future. Where is development going to occur? How is Beaver County going to grow? How is the corridor going to be impacted by that growth? And what are the possible changes in commuting and travel patterns on the corridor, so we can have a good sense of what the existing and the future needs will be. The outcomes of the project will be to identify strategies to improve operations, safety, and accessibility for all users. They may be policies that would be recommended for the municipalities to pass. It could also be projects such as an intersection upgrade at the 5 Points intersection, or the construction of a sidewalk where it's missing today. We'll be able to identify what the priority improvements are, and then we'll be able to help identify funding sources and approaches to implementing the projects. We're all aware we wouldn't be able to fix the entire corridor in one fell swoop. So what we'll do is we'll break up the potential improvements into pieces that can be implemented over time as funding becomes available.
So what happens now? Since we kicked off the project in January, the project team has been hard at work collecting and analyzing various sources of data. conducting outreach to our many stakeholders, and getting an understanding of existing conditions. Your participation tonight is a very important part of the information we need to collect. This is our first public meeting, but we hope it's not the last point at which you'll be engaged. We have an interactive online wiki map up where people can add ideas. You'll see that a little bit later. And we have an online survey. We'll drop links for both of those in the chat. If you haven't already used those tools, please do. They'll both be open through Monday, March 8th. So we would encourage you to get involved and check those out prior to next Monday. The comments you share tonight and any information you add to the wiki map or the survey will factor into the existing conditions analysis and is going to help us shape and prioritize our recommendations. That local context really helps us make sure that what we include in the plan is practical and makes sense for everyone. Once we have a solid understanding of the existing conditions, we establish some expectations for future conditions, as Scott said, based on what we know today and what we can reasonably expect to be the case in the future. And we begin to identify needs and draft recommendations. Everything we develop will be vetted by our project steering committee, and we plan to return to all of you and the broader public this spring and May perhaps to share what we've come up with and to seek your feedback. So ultimately, the corridor plan will include short, medium, and long-term recommendations and strategies for how to get these projects done and how they can be funded. The discussion at that point would be among various agencies, perhaps including PennDOT, municipal leaders, county commissioners, state representatives, to determine which projects are priorities and where to focus the improvements first. Given the current funding environment, perhaps it's not all going to happen overnight, but laying out a list of improvements to meet community needs in the long term, the long range, 10 to 20 years, is a really important step in making sure that something does ultimately happen. So with that, I'm thinking it's time to open it up for some questions. On the share here. If anyone has questions, please enter them in the chat box, and Heather, our meeting host, will ask them to the project team.
Yes, it doesn't look like we have any questions at the moment, just a few different destinations along the corridor that a few folks would like to, or that are some of their goals and locations that they access, including Lowe's, the Windmill Golf and Ice Cream Place, which I definitely need to know more information about that when I'm on the corridor. As well as, oh, good. Oh, it looks like we have one. There we go. Heather, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so our first question is, I hear that 10 feet will be taken from property on each side of road, which will affect our plaza greatly. Is this true?
That is not something that we have, determined yet in this corridor planning study. That's the first that I'm hearing about it. That may be something that PennDOT's working on, but that's nothing that that we're examining at this point in time. Anything that we develop in this plan are only recommendations, and we're not to that point in the study yet to really determine that. There may be things that we come down the pipeline here of spot turning lanes at certain locations, which we heard there was some need at Center Grange Road and some others, but that's not something that we have entertained at this point in time.
Okay, our next question says, what do you see as the biggest opportunities for the corridor, and what are some challenges you envision as you go through this project?
I think the biggest opportunity is just really improving, operations and safety. We look at, certain choke points in the corridor being 5 points intersection. And I think everyone on this call can agree that's probably one of the main choke points in the corridor, not only operationally, but safety as well. So I think those are the types of things that we can definitely see being our biggest opportunities, but also, spot improvements as well, whether it be a turn lane or a connection of a sidewalk that's missing to improve mobility for those walking along the corridor as well. I think of our biggest opportunities. Challenges envisioning, I think it's always, it really boils down to probably maybe funding after the project. Again, as Scott mentioned and Jenny mentioned, you know, if funding does become available, it'll have to be piecemealed, you know, in certain sections of the roadway. You know, everyone recognizes that the 11 miles of roadway isn't going to be developed or not be developed, but improved at one shot. So it's definitely going to be piecemealed, and that's just the way it is. And you know, with the funding issues that are going on at the state and federal levels as well. So.
Yeah, so we also received a comment saying that Old Broadhead Road is often used as a shortcut for Broadhead Road in front of the mall.
Yes, absolutely. I think that is definitely a sentiment shared by the consultant team as well. And when you read that, I think some of us started giggling. So we definitely recognize that. And actually, I spoke with a gentleman, a local resident today on the phone a couple hours ago about, you know, North Branch being a connection up to Old Broadhead Road, that people utilize that and they tend to take it a little faster than they probably should. So that is definitely something that is being recognized and will be, you know, hopefully some recommendations addressing those types of issues in the corridor study. So
another question, would adding roundabouts to most of the intersections make things better instead of red lights?
Scott, I'm going to throw this one over to you since you have a little history of developing roundabouts, especially in Beaver County. So I'm going to throw that one to you, Scott, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, roundabouts aren't the perfect solution everywhere, but in some cases, you know, they are a good solution. So for example, if you have roadways with steep grades, you have to be careful about implementing a roundabout at those locations. You need to make sure that they're designed to be able to accommodate, you know, heavy trucks or school buses as they would navigate the road. So we wouldn't just out of hand want to go and put roundabouts at every intersection, but certainly these days we've found that they do reduce congestion and safety when they're implemented at appropriate locations. We would consider those as viable options, but it's certainly by no means a foregone conclusion for any of the intersections at this corridor.
Given the funding challenges, will the plan include priority projects and a set of guiding principles for how elements of the project are initiated?
Yeah, I definitely think we may have touched upon that a little bit earlier on, but yeah, we're definitely going to identify short, medium, and long-term recommendations. We're going to have funding sources in the plan that helps identify how things could be to be funded and how things can get programmed in a wide variety of different programs, including our transportation improvement program here at SPC. But we also want to identify other forms of funding as well. For traffic signals, for instance, there's a few different forms of funding sources, one being automated red light enforcement from the state, one being Green Light Go, and then we also have our own program here at SPC, our regional traffic signal program. So we want to make recommendations, but we also want them to be real enough that they can be implemented down the line and have a certain funding stream associated with them so that they can be implemented. And it's really just not a pipe dream. So.
And would a turning lane be considered?
Yes, turning lanes will definitely be considered. I think that's definitely one of the goals. And you know, we talked about our initial scope of work with our consultant team. That was definitely being mentioned in that scope of work. We've heard from a numerous, not numerous, but quite a few folks already that certain roadways already are probably in need of spot turn lanes. One being Center Grange Road. And there are a couple other that come to mind as well. So yes, turn lanes will more than likely be considered in the plan, especially for spot improvements. And really those improve not only operations, but safety as well. So.
Will the study include recommendations for visual upgrades? Will any consideration be given to maintain a sense of community, to develop places along the corridor? Keep local identities from Hopewell, Aliquippa, Center, and Monaca.
Yeah, I'm gonna start out by answering that, but I also want to turn it over to our consultant team as well. We recognize in this corridor that there are 3 distinct municipalities and really 2 fringe municipalities in Monaca and Moon Township as well that aren't as invested as the 3 municipalities on the corridor right now. But, even going back to when I was taking my courses in planning at IUP, you always want to make sure you have a sense of place, and really it drives home the need, and also brings a sense of community to these places. So we definitely want to make sure we keep that. We don't want to turn this into another freeway. We want to make sure we continue the character and enhance the character of the roadway and the surrounding communities, and definitely keep the local identities of the 3 municipalities, multiple municipalities, as well as Beaver County as well. Jenny or Scott, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, we collected and are taking into account local land use plans and zoning regulations, not with the intention that we're going to revamp any of those locally generated documents, but we want to get a sense of what local intentions are and what visions communities have for the future. So also in speaking with stakeholders and of course in your public comments, it's really important to us to identify what features along the corridor are important to a sense of place or have that local flair or flavor that we want to reinforce and support and continue moving forward. So I think it's an important consideration for our recommendations.
Why was the section of Old Broadhead Road serving Penn State omitted? It was part of the original submission.
State. Can you repeat that one more time, Heather?
Why was the section of Old Broadhead Road serving Penn State omitted? It was part of the original submission.
Dawn, I'm going to throw that one to you if you wouldn't mind. I know, we talk about the needs of the corridor, and really, we could really creep out the scope of work to include a wide variety, but we are going to look at Old Broadhead Road and some of the movements. We have spoken to Penn State Beaver and CCBC Penn State Beaver that accesses that roadway. And so there will be some things in the plan that help address some of that stuff. And I think, when speaking with Penn State Beaver and some of their operational challenges in wanting transit to come to their campus and so on and so forth, I do think indirectly we will probably have some recommendations in that, even though it's really not in the full scope of work itself. But there will be some things in the plan to help alleviate some of those issues. So.
Yeah, I'll just add, that's not intentional or by design. We went through the scope of work with Beaver County and with PennDOT. As Josh mentioned, it's on the edge of the study area. We will likely include, although we won't, we will likely include recommendations at that intersection.
So someone is also asking if we have thought of adding a parallel road between 376 and Broadhead, which might relieve the pressure on Broadhead and also create access to a lot of land that is available for expansion.
Yeah, I think, adding a new roadway is obviously very expensive. So I think, enhancing what we already have, improving what we already have is kind of the new name of the game for transportation, for all roadways in our region and throughout the country, is trying to make better of what we have. That could be looked at. That's not something that we've entertained at this point in time in the study, but making those connections and maybe making those parcels more accessible to Brodhead Road may be the way to go. But we could definitely consider that comment moving forward as we develop some of these recommendations.
I'll just add, we will review the municipal planning documents, see if that is mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
We will project future traffic. Really, a frontage road like the one that's been being asked about. I think a lot of it is going to depend on future traffic projections and looking at the land availability for development in that area. So that's something, I mean, everything's on the table, but that's quite an undertaking to have a frontage road like that. We will look at future traffic and we will look at land use to see if that's warranted.
Thanks, Tom.
And we're receiving a lot of comments about the importance of sidewalks and having safe places to jog or bike, and wondering if there will be any bike or jogging lanes part of the project.
Yeah, so part of the project is, and we will be doing this probably come springtime, is conducting what's called a walkability assessment. And really, the consultant team and more than likely SPC staff will be out in the corridor trying to find those gaps in sidewalks to really enhance or recommend connecting some of these sidewalks that may have gaps along the corridor. As for an adjacent bike lane or something along those lines adjacent to the corridor, really that's why we're here. We want to hear from you guys and understand some of the needs of the community. We can do all the outreach or do all the analysis of data we want. But if that's really what the community wants, then absolutely, definitely something that should be considered in a plan like this, because that enhances safety. An adjacent path like that only enhances safety and mobility. It improves mobility of folks that want to bike and walk along the corridor. So that is definitely something along those types of lines that we'll be looking at to improve mobility and safety for pedestrians and bicyclists.
Will we? Oh, I'm sorry.
Good,
Go
Dom.
ahead.
Just a point of clarity here, because I keep hearing the word being used. This is not a project. This is a study that will result in recommendations for projects. So I just want that to be clarified. When I hear, is this or that going to be part of the project? This is not the project. This is the first step. This is the study. And it's a study that will recommend projects. So I just want to clear that up.
Thanks, Tom.
Will we consider the additional traffic burden caused by the Shell plant to Brodhead Road, Old Broadhead, and 18 intersection?
Scott, if you wouldn't mind taking that one, since we talked a little bit about the COVID factor as well as the Shell plant.
Yeah, certainly. And we're keeping in mind the impacts of the construction of the Shell cracker plant and the thousands of workers that go there every day. We're keeping in mind the impacts of the pandemic on reducing traffic volumes on the corridor these days, and factoring those traffic volumes up to account for pre-COVID and post-COVID conditions. And then we're going to directly account for the long-term workers that would be at the cracker plant. And then we're also identifying additional locations that are likely to have development along the corridor so that we can really plan for the future vision for what the corridor would need, over the next 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, and that's up to date with all the questions we've received so far.
We have time for maybe one or two more if anything else is on your mind.
As we wait for any other questions to come in, we appreciate everyone's input. And when we get to the breakout groups, I think it'll be a little bit more interactive. We can unmute our microphones and we can talk a little bit more one-on-one in smaller groups on specific topics. So we appreciate the feedback already, and we hope to get a little bit more feedback as we continue on through our breakout groups as well. So yeah, just thanks again, and we'll continue to talk a little bit more about a couple more questions here. So.
What are your plans for the school zones for Fatima and Hopewell Junior High? My apologies if I said the school name wrong.
I think that's Old Lady of Fatima, if I recall. I think it's how it's pronounced. I'm gonna, Scott, if you wouldn't mind taking that one to talk a little bit about school zones in some of the high schools in the corridor.
Yeah, it's one of the elements that we're evaluating. We're looking at the school zones, and we can cross-reference that with the crashes And then we've directly reached out to school districts to understand their needs. So we don't have any specific plans for it right now. We're just trying to identify where there might be deficiencies now or in the future and come up with solutions for them. So we don't have any specific plans.
And for the last question here, it's a great one. Someone's asking how they can get the word out to more people from the community so that more people attend the next meeting.
Yeah, so this is really a small fraction of some of our outreach that we've already done. Like we mentioned before, we have a survey that's available. I think we've have over 60 to 70 responses with that survey. We also have our Wikimap tool, which is another interactive online tool that allows folks to identify and pinpoint spot locations to identify certain needs. And then also potentially upload videos or photos of something that may concern the citizens. And we've gotten quite a number of responses through that as well. This is our first public meeting. We had some great registrations, obviously understanding that, everyone may not be able to attend. We'll have those things open, so we're going to do a little bit more outreach. We met with the 3 county commissioners, and we're grateful for their time to host us. And they were working with us to help get the word out via their forms of communication, as well as their Facebook pages as well. We put a little bit of money into Facebook targeted ads. So if you're on Facebook, you may have seen some of those Facebook targeted ads. And last but not least, Scott and I had the opportunity to be on a radio show yesterday, if I recall. Sorry, time flies. And we were on 99.3 up in Beaver County, helping to promote and get the word out about the project as well. So while the numbers may not look that great right now on paper, we have done some pretty significant outreach. And we obviously would like to hear from everyone in the county, and we'll continue to do so and continue to get the word out and utilize our channels of resources through Beaver County and some of our channels of means to do so.
Do we have time for any more?
We probably should move on, make sure we have time for our small group discussions. So for the remainder of time, our plan is to split into smaller breakout groups, each talking about different aspects of transportation on Brodhead Road. Heather, would you mind pulling up the next slide?
Yes.
Each of the breakout groups will have a host from the project team who will have our interactive wiki map up on the screen for reference and for notes. So we'll have a group for safety issues. Yeah, you see the list there. There's a group for congestion, or perhaps that would include things about driving on Broadhead that are frustrating in general. There we are. A group about pedestrians, bicycles, and transit. That would be the multimodal room. Land use and development, just to talk about whether future changes we know about are going to impact transportation and how. And the grab bag, other ideas and concerns for anything else you think the project team needs to know. So this is a choose your own adventure. We have this set up so that everyone can pick which breakout room they want to join. You'll be able to enter and leave breakout rooms freely and jump around between them if you like. When Heather opens the breakout rooms, you should see a list of rooms from which you can select. You should see a prompt that says something like join a breakout room. There is a little breakout rooms icon in your meeting controls that looks like a little square window. If you click it, the list of rooms will pop up. You can click join next to any one of those rooms on the list. And once you're in the breakout, you can do the same exact thing to switch to a different room. If when Heather opens the rooms, you do not see any of that, it could mean that you're running an older version of Zoom or you're using a web browser that doesn't support this feature, in which case, no problem. Just enter into the chat if you have a preference for a room you want to join, and we'll make sure that we get you in there. If you get into a breakout and want to switch and can't, the breakout host should also be able to help move you to where you want to be. The breakouts will run for the rest of the meeting, so I want to take the opportunity now to thank everybody for their time this evening and all of the thoughts you're sharing with us. Your help is so incredibly important to the success of what we're hoping to accomplish for Brodhead Road. Josh, Dom, project team, any other final thoughts before we open the rooms?
No, just thank you for your feedback thus far. Any questions that we haven't answered in the chat box, we can certainly follow up and we'll make sure they'll be addressed in the plan as well. So just wanted to make sure there's a couple questions that may have come in after our time is allotted, but no worries. We will make sure your voice is heard. So.
Great. Well, if all else fails in the chaos, there is a help me button. So if you click that, one of the hosts will do what we can to make sure you're in the room you want to be in. All right, Heather, let's roll.
All right.
I heard this from a town, I thought it was a township meeting, so we called the township. And then we called, they said, no, we had nothing to do with it, called PennDOT, and then we called, I think it was PennDOT. Then they looked into it and then they sent us info. But I never knew anything about this. You would think that if you're on the Broadhead, especially a frontage on the Broadhead, some of those individuals, business or residential, but maybe business to start, would have been at least somehow contacted, so we at least can give input. So I'm glad I got a little shot at it, even though it was probably around the bout, from the backside. So how are we going to know about the next one? What can we do to get that? Is there any way to be on a mailing list or something?
Well, I think we have everyone's email, correct me if I'm wrong, Jenny, that registered for this. So you all will be on another email blast once we have our second outreach and public meeting. So you will all be invited to that, and please feel free to share that. We will also be doing our standard outreach, going through our partners at the county and Joe West and Livability, as well as the commissioners have been graceful enough and gracious enough to help host us. And we'll probably, Dom and myself will probably be back there in a couple of weeks presenting of what we heard from you guys all here today, and utilize that avenue, as well as I think Scott and I may be doing our second radio appearance on the radio. I think we were welcome back. So hopefully we'll have that other avenue as well. So we'll definitely be attacking the same avenues. So you guys are definitely all invited back, and we have your email. So we appreciate the input here from each and every one of you this evening. So
very good. Thank you.
Penny, Don, Scott, anything else before we wrap it up this evening?
I just wanted to finish a thought that before we got rerouted to the main room again. And that is that, as I said, we're going to do a study that tries to look at the roadway and have the roadway meet the needs of the community for the next 25 years. So that doesn't mean that the upcoming PennDOT project, paving project, is going to, include all the recommendations that come out of the study. The study is going to come out with quite a few recommended projects, I think, and I think the best hope is for working with everybody to prioritize those recommendations, and perhaps PennDOT can work on their project, have their project include the low-hanging fruit, the easy, and maybe even pick off a turn lane or here or there to include in the project. It all depends on the amount of funding that they have for the betterment and whether that can be enhanced or not. But we'll be back at a second public meeting with I think our initial stab at some initial recommendations, and we'll get a second opportunity to get your feedback on those recommendations, and then we'll move forward from there. We plan on keeping everybody in the loop. We plan on touching base again, as Josh said, with the commissioners, the Beaver County commissioners, the communities, and so forth. So that's it.
Yeah. So, good. One more comment.
I was just gonna say thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We appreciate the feedback. Please feel free to check out the website, spcregion.org/Broadhead. If you have any additional questions, my email's on there, and feel free to reach out. And we thank you all for your time, and have a good rest of the evening. So thank you all.
You too.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.